Okay, there's a new enemy for CSS. It's the old enemy. It's seemingly always the enemy. It's the main focus of CSS development right now, and it is specificity. Amidst all the library builders, all the tool makers, the JS developers, even the actual API movers within browsers, this seems to be the main focus over and over. And I guess it's the mindset these days, we're very focused on small componentized logic, small pieces of scoped, functional, immutable data that's really well defined. And CSS, you just attach a file to the page and it just sort of slops its classes all over the place and makes a big mess. And it kind of makes people very anxious. So it seems to be the main thing that people always seem to hate about CSS is their fears that a class has been defined somewhere and it's going to accidentally change something else, it's going to break something, even though really it's a problem that's been solved many times over. Partly it's a strength of CSS that you basically have lots of options, lots of ways of overwriting things and challenging things depending on what structure or scope you decide to go with. You could write some inventive naming structure that again makes it easier to understand. The onus is on you is the problem. These days the mindset is towards tailwind utility classes. The idea is we'll just use lots of single properties, and that way we won't have to use double properties and IDs and important and try and override one another. We'll just use lots and lots of classes. That's one approach. Obviously there's CSS in JS. Again, you're scoping all your CSS to individual components. Nothing bleeds out. That's an approach. You can use some sort of UI library, so you could just something where you just pass your props in and then that will confirm the styles. You pass in your themes or whatever, and maybe some options to make it move in a certain way, but you generally don't touch the CSS. That's an option that would solve the problem. But there's also out the box solutions coming. There's apt scope, which is going to again enable you to scope certain elements of CSS, and the new thing is cascade layers, which everyone's talking about. Is going to give you the ability to group CSS into layers, and then you can set the priority order of those layers. So again, you can start to really group things together. We're throwing everything we've got at this problem. We're really, really keen to solve the specificity problem, It doesn't actually give you anything new. This is a problem that's a bit like SAS enables you to build lots of things, but ultimately what you get at the end of it is just regular CSS. So you're not given any new power. It's just about your mindset and approach. So it's not like a CSS grid or variable fonts or something where you literally have something new to put on a page that you previously couldn't render. You couldn't do the thing you need to. This is just going to give you another headache about how you approach your CSS to make sure it's all scaled, scoped, and not going to have any overwrites. It's kind of a bit like you could say TypeScript. It doesn't actually give you anything new in JavaScript. It enables you to have more confidence and do more checks on the code you do, but ultimately it boils down and gives you some JavaScript at the end of it. So there's not a new feature. You're just changing your mindset and your approach to how you write it, I suppose. It does, however, feed into a recent push towards super low specificity and trying to really make sure you make nothing that has any sense of override. So the recent focus has been on CSS resets. Josh Kumo and others have started making their own reset files, which were I think people did years ago. You had a normalize or some sort of reset that just nukes all the browser styles and just says these should be your smart defaults, but you're just attaching them to HTML elements, so just styles for body, styles for image, styles for UL tags. You're just trying to say here are some base settings, and any styles you write will obviously overwrite these, so it's just a flat line. You could go one up on that is classless CSS. So again, you could provide some fonts, some themes, some sizes, and then it will just set some properties. So these are not resets, but they're just some base settings on, again, your H1, your image, your paragraph tags. So you've got some reset stuff. But if there's any situation where you need to overwrite or change something, just write a class, and that will automatically win out. So it's super, super low specificity. Further still is open props, which is an interesting new idea where from what I see, the entire environment is just set up with lots and lots of custom variables. So you just pass loads and loads of variables into things, and it means because those variables are scoped to the element, in any situation where you have a problem, you can just change that variable setting. So it means you should be able to get some blanket styles, but again, no specificity, because these are just there's no CSS at all. It's just loads of settings, and you should be able to just tweak and adjust those. The thing is, all of those approaches, they all you could say solve specificity or solve any scoping issues, but they all have potential to give you similar headaches down the road. They all have ability to somehow clash and overwrite, or scenarios where you want to overwrite something, so you have to find a workaround. It doesn't obfuscate that you will eventually have to, engage with your CSS, which is what people are most scared of. You're going to have to actually look at it, understand it, and try and work out, the best way forward. And you can keep throwing these problems, or you can keep throwing these solutions at the situation, but it might be easier just to think, more logically about how you want to write things. This one is probably quite relatable to people. It's quite common you get this where there's a long document and then you've got this modal that comes up with the overlay. You start scrolling, the modal has an internal scroll bar, but when you get to the end, the page doesn't know what to do because you're still trying to trigger a scroll, so it starts just scrolling the next document behind it. So you start scrolling, and then whatever, you click to close the modal, and then the page is scrolled halfway down, and the user doesn't understand, if it's like a list of products or articles and they don't understand why their page has changed. Usually the way around is then you have to make a setting that when the modal opens, you add a class to the body which sets the overflow fixed, and then that way you can't overscroll the background, and then when they close it, you have to remember to remove that class and you lock it. But it's kind of quite messy. So there's a property now called Overscroll behaviour, which lets you control the scrolling within a particular thing. And if we set the contain, which we can do here on the modal, what this will do is lock the scrolling so that when I get to the bottom here, I'm trying to scroll right now, but nothing happens because of the scrolling has been scoped to that particular element. And the scrolling, or the overscroll, as in you're scrolling past the limit, has been locked in. I mean, this is just one of those, again, where CSS can now solve a thing that you really needed JavaScript for before. So, awesome one to keep in your back pocket. Okay, final thing. I just stumbled across csstracking.dev, where they've got a new idea of CSS fingerprint. Basically, the idea is that because CSS enables you to import things, you're able to load fonts, you're able to load external style sheets, external images, things like that. It has the ability to access URLs that will then be requested by the browser. And obviously that's used now for fonts and images and things. Sometimes people have suggested there's a security vulnerability there, that it's able to ping external scripts and update things. There's potential for it to pull in a data URI of something corruptible. But it could also be used in a smart way for some form of tracking. So you could set a background image on like your body element or something to be a URL, which is going to ping a stats aggregator or some sort of tracking service that's going to just ping it to say that this is the current browser. Because if we have CSS settings to be able to detect whether it's a touch screen, whether it's a certain screen width, whether it's a dark mode, light mode. There are all kinds of settings within CSS files to detect what kind of user there is. You could then use custom props to sort of work out what all those settings are and then just ping and load that asset. And then you could just work out from that what type of usage you're getting. The significance here is that it doesn't require any JavaScript. It doesn't require any cookies. It doesn't require any clever settings. You wouldn't need your little notification in the corner. It's less. It's more limited than JavaScript in giving you like lots of browser details and so on. But it's an interesting thing because I think people hate cookies and hate these tracking, and there's obviously a lot of movement to try and get away from external JavaScript. So this is just one way of starting to extend CSS to instead just kind of use inherent settings it already has to kind of offer something different, to offer some way of pinging some information. Maybe it's a kind of grubby hack, but there seems like there's some interesting potential there to use CSS beyond being just a styling language. Anyway, that's all for now. Have a lovely time. I'll see you later.